Okay guys, I'm back in my studio, and this next video is showing how I scratch the head that I cut open and carved out and how I attach it. So we've talked in class with my 4th and 5th graders, and I think even my other grades, scratch to attach. And so I'm actually taking a blade and I'm scratching with the knife, crisscross all around, really roughing up this edge here. And I'm going to do the same thing to this one. And then I want to make sort of a glue paste with the clay. Basically, I'm just going to take some water that has some dissolved clay in it. It's not yet really slip. It's not thick enough to call it clay slip. But it is some water that has some dried up dissolved clay kind of floating around in the bottom. And I'm just going to take an old paintbrush here that's nice and thick. And I'm going to brush it, that wet water, that watery, kind of muddy water, over this area that I have hacked to pieces with my blade. And then I'm going to put that, you can see the hole where that dowel rod went through when I had wrapped it around my armature. So now I'm going to add this, stick it on there, and get it on there just right. And there's going to be a seam that I need to get rid of, and I want to make sure that it closes up really well. So I probably will roll a very thin coil and add that to the edge and blend that. We've talked about rolling coils in class. A coil is basically a snake of clay, or a rope of clay, some people call it. So I'm looking at her skull, wondering, I wonder if I put it on this way. Did I do it that way? No, that doesn't look right. That looks like she's wearing a baseball cap. Backwards. All right. So I actually bent and moved her neck and kind of bent it over and curved it over and turned her head, because I didn't want her looking just straightforward. I didn't think that would be as interesting as if I wanted to have something that wasn't straightforward. And I wanted to show those elongated proportions like the artist Amedeo Modigliani. And we have talked about him in some of my classes. The proportions that he used were very long, slender necks and very long, oblong faces and elongated facial proportions. So there she is, and I'm starting to blend here, but I probably will add more than that because I don't want it. Remember that the clay dries. As it dries, it shrinks, and I don't want that seam to pull apart as the clay dries and shrinks. So I'm going to add a coil to that and blend it. And as this clay gets leather hard, I'll do more carving and shaping on it. But right now I'm using this wooden tool, and you can see one end is almost like a popsicle stick, but it's got a little bit of a curve, slight curve to it. And this one is just kind of like a straight flat triangle shape. And I'm just using it sort of to scrape. So many of you guys have given me Starbucks gift cards as gifts, and I want you to know that after I use them, I keep them, and I use them to scrape the clay. This is a great scraping tool. I have boxes of them from all the years that you guys have so generously on Teacher Appreciation Week given me these cards. I bet you didn't know that I was using them as clay tools after I spent them at Starbucks. So I'm just scraping like this and smoothing out that seam. And again, I will probably go back in there and add some more clay just to be sure. Like for example, if I take this that's already scraped off, adding a, this would be a coil, and I would add that on that seam and press and blend it with my fingers and blend it in. But first I'm going to get all this done and check it out, make sure it's good and tight, and then go back in and see where I might have some weak spots. I can feel the weak spots with my fingers, but I want to make sure I've got a good seal on there. So we'll come back to me later building the ears, which ought to be interesting because, as I told you guys, I've never made a clay bust before. I did some very stylized ones that were little miniature things, but I've never done one like this before, never this big, and I usually do clay do container work. Sometimes I do figurative too, but it's so stylized. This just feels real new and scary and different for me because this is unknown territory, and I've never done ears before. But I've been doing my research and watching lots of YouTube videos, and many of you don't know, even though I have a degree in fine arts, my degree is actually in drawing and painting from University of Georgia, and I didn't have any 3D classes until I went back and got my art education degree, and I took one clay class right before I graduated and was doing my student teaching. So I only got that on the tail end as I went out. So I depend on a lot of art friends to help me along, and YouTube videos, and a lot of experimentation and practice in my studio here down in my basement. And I wanted to share that with you so that you guys can see this, how we're not just born knowing this stuff. We got to practice and figure it out and make mistakes. So you can see where I've taken a clay tool that looks almost like a metal brush, and I've scraped on that seam, and you can see how it's wet and gooey because I did brush it with that water like I talked about there. And then I've rolled out a few pieces of coil, and not big. They're not big at all, really. They're pretty small, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to press it in, and as I press it in, it kind of stretches and grows and goes around the back. So I'm going to blend that in, get rid of any weak spots, and I'll probably go back over that with my Starbucks card that you guys gave me, and I'll do that all the way around to make sure that it's going to stay on there.